In today's video, we will be taking a look at the 2024 Senate election as of today, June 20th of 2023. Now, in case if you've been wondering, why does Nebraska have two Senate races? Well, one of the incumbents retired, so there will be two races, one in the original election and one as a special election. Obviously, Nebraska is going to go safe red, but with that in mind, let's get started. Now, the Republicans are at a huge advantage, being at 47 seats, as opposed to Democrats at 39, and Republicans are definitely going offensive. They only have two Republican incumbents, being in the states of Texas and Florida, who are both expected to have easy wins, and Democrats have to defend 12 seats to hold on to their narrow 51 to 49 Senate majority. They have to defend states such as West Virginia and Montana in order to hold that Senate majority, which could be quite a challenge given that those are completely safe red seats. And with that in mind, let's start with the Democrats' likely states because they are trading so much on the Senate tally. Now, first off, the first likely Democratic state will be the state of New Jersey. Robert Menendez is not the most popular incumbent. Last time, he was expected to win by a single-digit margin. However, he did overperform expectations as Democrats generally overperformed in 2018. He won by 11.2 points, and this time I expect a similar margin from him, as his approval rating has actually increased, and I think although 2024 will not be as good as 2018 for Democrats, he should be able to still win the election handedly, but just not by a safe margin. Another state that I would say the same for is the state of Pennsylvania, is the state of New Mexico. Now, New Mexico with Martin Henrich, who won 54 to 35 in the last election in 2018, and by an impressive margin of 164,100 some votes, is not going to win by such a substantial margin because Gary Johnson took away 15%, 107,000 votes, from most of which should have went to the GOP candidate if he was not in this race, which means that in most likelihood, Martin Henrich would still win re-election, obviously, but probably by a margin of around 12 points in the state of New Mexico, thus resulting in a likely margin. Now, the state of Virginia. Virginia with Tim Kaine, a pretty popular incumbent, and the 2016 running mate with Hillary Clinton. Tim Kaine won the state by 16 points and expect a similar performance by him. Nonetheless, I expect a slightly better Republican performance, as Corey Stewart was not the best Republican challenger, not to mention that really 2024 would not be as good of a Democratic environment as 2018. So I'll put that in the likely Democratic category. Now, the final likely Democratic state is going to be the state of Minnesota. Incumbent Amy Klobuchar won by an impressive 24 points against her Republican challenger, or by an impressive 626,000 votes. However, she will still do very, very well in the state, and I think she'll win by around 12 points, but not a safe margin because I don't think she's going to be able to win all these rural counties. That's really difficult in such a polarizing environment like it is right now. So I'm going to give it to her by a likely margin. Now, these are the remaining states, and there's quite a few likely Republican states to go through. First off is the state of Texas. Texas last time with Ted Cruz only winning by 2.6 points against Beto O'Rourke. Not necessarily the best margin for a Republican incumbent. Nonetheless, this time it is expected that Beto O'Rourke does worse if he chooses to run for this race, as he has been more hard on guns and became much more of a liberal candidate, someone that Texans will likely not support. Thus, regardless if he runs or not, I think Beto O'Rourke will definitely lose, or any Democrat will lose the state of Texas to Ted Cruz by around 10 points in the Senate race. Same goes for the state of Florida. Rick Scott pulled up an upset against Bill Nelson, the Democratic incumbent. Most people expected Bill Nelson to win, but he did not. This really started a trend for Republicans favoring Republicans in the state of Florida in recent elections. Again, Bill Nelson did not do as well as Hillary Clinton did in Miami-Dade County, being one of the reasons why he lost the state and the incumbent seat in the state of Florida. Ultimately, though, we'll have to see, but I think Rick Scott is definitely favored given how strongly Republicans have performed in recent elections in the state of Florida. So definitely a likely seat in both of those states. Now finally, another Republican likely state that will put them at 50 seats will be the state of West Virginia. West Virginia is currently held by incumbent Democrat Joe Manchin, but he is definitely not going to win re-election. I don't think that's much of a surprise. First off, Manchin won in 2012 by a stunning margin of around 30 percentage points, but in 2018, a much more beneficial environment for Democrats, he was only able to win by 3 points because of polarization, which has since increased in 2024. At the end of the day, Joe Manchin is in a state that Trump won by 40 points, so it's going to be really hard for him to actually win re-election. Thus, I would say that any Republican that challenges him will probably win by around 10 points. I think he'll still definitely do better than any other Democrat, but just not good enough to win re-election. Now in these final 7 states, we'll just go state by state, starting with Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. First off, the state of Wisconsin. Wisconsin's incumbent Tammy Baldwin is running for re-election, and last time she was able to win by more than 10 points, a pretty promising lead for the incumbent Democrat. Now, 2018 was definitely a blue wave election. However, Democrats won the generic ballot in the House by around 8 percentage points. We're not going to be considering the Senate generic ballot because not all states are considered. And she outperformed the generic ballot. And that means if Democrats win the popular vote at all, she's probably going to win re-election, which is a very good thing for the Democratic Party. And I think that Democrats will end up winning the popular vote on the presidential ballot. Thus, I think that Tammy Baldwin should be able to win re-election by somewhere around a tilt margin. This is going to be a very close race because this is a presidential election year, and Republicans are expected to win the state of Wisconsin at the presidential level. But I think this could be a split ballot state. Now, Debbie Stabenow is not running for re-election in the state of Michigan, which makes the state more interesting. She only won against John James by 6.5 points. And now John James is a representative. He cannot run. Pretty much he will not run for the Michigan Senate election. Nonetheless, I think Republicans have a decent shot here too. Although Democrats are favored in the presidential election race, it is far from a lock-in for Democrats. And at the end of the day, I think this race will still be close. Nonetheless, I think Democrats could still drive out turnout in the Detroit area, and although black voters are not so energetic to vote for Democrats, they're definitely not going to go for Republicans either, and I think Republicans could lose some energy, and potentially Democrats should still be able to win the state of Michigan by around a lean margin. Now going to Ohio. Ohio did go to Sherrod Brown by a margin of 7 points, which was very impressive for the incumbent in a more conservative state in general. However, Jim Beam Renacci was losing the polls by sometimes up to 15 points, making him give up in the Senate race, and Republicans not providing any funding for him whatsoever pretty much, and he was still able to do decently against Sherrod Brown, pulling off 46.6% of the vote against the Democratic incumbent. And this time, with definitely more attention diluted into this race, it could be harder for Sherrod Brown to win re-election. For one, although he has the support of Democrats, he may not be moderate enough for Republicans to actually vote for him. And I think that Republican turnout will be very strong in the presidential election year, where Trump will likely be on the ballot, and considering that he is definitely going to win the presidential election in the state of Ohio, Sherrod Brown could be in a run for his life. And I think at the end of the day, I think Republicans are slightly favored in the state of Ohio by around a lean margin. Now for the state of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania with a very strong incumbent Bob Casey, who won by 13 points against Lou Barletta, the GOP candidate, and by an impressive 658,000 votes. Now this was a very impressive performance by Bob Casey. He won counties like Allegheny and Philadelphia, as well as some of the suburbs, by incredible margins, and were able to win some more conservative counties, such as the county of Beaver, which Democrats lost by 15 points in 2020, which he was actually able to carry. And I think Bob Casey won't be able to do as well in a presidential election year, but I think that at the end of the day, Democrats are probably going to be favored in Pennsylvania on the presidential election level, which means that him being a very, very strong incumbent should be able to win in the state of Pennsylvania by somewhere around a lean margin. So that's that. Now going to the state of Montana. Now, unlike Joe Manchin in the state of West Virginia, Jon Tester was in a fight for his life in the first election he was elected in. By just around 3 points, Montana voters gave Jon Tester his first election win, and pretty much by the same margin in his next election and in his third election, which was in 2018. Despite the environment being very favorable for the Democratic Party, he also only won by 3.5 points, a very, very narrow margin. And this time around, Republicans could also find a pretty decent candidate against Jon Tester. And this will be a presidential election year in which the generic ballot will be less favorable for the Democratic Party. All those factors considering, and I don't believe Jon Tester will be able to win. At the end of the day, polarization is definitely a significant factor, and I don't see how he's going to convince 20 or 30% of Republicans to split the ballot and end up voting for Jon Tester while they're voting for someone like Donald Trump on the presidential election ballot. I think he'll do well, but not well enough to win the state of Montana, thus giving the state to Republicans by around a lean margin. Now, 2 more states to follow: Nevada and Arizona. First off, in the state of Nevada, Jackie Rosen defeated Dean Heller, the incumbent, by 5 points. A pretty good performance given that, again, Dean Heller was the incumbent. She was also able to win a majority of the votes rather than a plurality. At the end of the day, I think Jackie Rosen, her performance in 2018 was quite good against an incumbent, and for that reason, I think Jackie Rosen should be able to win re-election by a narrow margin of about 1 to 2 percentage points. Finally, in Arizona, now that Kristen Sinema is a third-party candidate, this race is a lot more interesting between Kristen Sinema, the incumbent, and a Democrat and a Republican. It's expected that incumbent Kristen Sinema ends up coming in at third place with around 15% of the votes. The question is, as a third-party candidate, where does most of her votes come from? And it's likely that Democrats will feel more sympathetic for their incumbent and end up casting some votes for Kristen Sinema, which will end up splitting a lot of the Democratic votes, ultimately resulting in Democrats losing a seat in part and in large part thanks to Kristen Sinema being an independent candidate who splits away the Democratic vote. And because of that reason, I think that Kristen Sinema will end up hurting the Democrats and as a result give a Senate seat for the Republican Party. Anyways, this will be my final map. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day. Goodbye.